maybe I should just quickly say that we are 4 people short of our symposium. We've had a whole lot of, I don't even know what to call it, you know, people getting mail.
Signals were sent to us.
So as I said, Claudia and Jenna are kind of struggling with these kind of physical ailments, and Abby has flu, and Joseph won't be joining us because he's scrambling with admin. So we're actually a half symposium. And we were very much, Hashila and I, just before this, were very much in 2 minds about whether to postpone or to carry on. Our thinking, well, my thinking anyway, I'm not sure about Hashila, is to actually continue with the symposium. There'll be 4 presentations, which is already enough for a morning anyway. And yeah, it's just one of those things. I'd kind of like to hear from everybody about what you would prefer, whether you would like to postpone to a point where we can get the full complement, or whether we should continue today, and that's that. So responses?
I'm happy to continue.
Okay, great, thank you. Alex is happy to continue. Busisiwe?
Yes, let's continue. I'm willing
okay,
to
excellent, good. And Mvuzo, let's just hear from you.
Yes, no, I don't mind. We can happily. I'm happy to that we continue.
Okay. Yeah, okay. It will be recorded, so I mean we'll send it to the others, and there will be opportunities to connect up. Hopefully very many opportunities to connect up. So this will just be the first of many, and maybe we just have to accept the contingency of, you know, body betrayal that this is going to happen, and we still need to continue with our program, you know, fairly religiously on the days that we have decided. It's a very full program. It's a very full program for Hashila and I, because we are doing 2 jobs now. So we're doing our NRF stuff and we're doing this NIHSS stuff. And so it's very difficult for us to kind of be completely flexible. So, okay, yay, we will continue. That's great. Hashila, would you like to sort of say hi?
Hi, yes. Okay, so hi, everybody. I think we kind of know each other's faces now, seeing that, you know, we all saw each other last week at the meet and greet, which was, I think, quite a successful event. I just want to say, just to feedback on that, it was the first time we did a hybrid function where we had people in the room and we had some of you guys on Zoom. And feedback that I got from other people, for example, the university photographer and things, was that it went off without a glitch. They've been at other functions where things went completely pear-shaped. So I want to just say thank you to all of you, especially those of you that attended via the streaming through Zoom. Thank you for, you know, your technical prowess where it came to being in attendance in the function. So I just want to say that. And secondly, happy Africa Day to everybody. And you know, our chair is Identities and Social Cohesion in Africa. And the fact that we're actually having the symposium today, I think that's going to resonate back. And then I am actually going to be excusing myself. I'm having, my laptop is like beyond being on a ventilator right now. And the IT guys want to remote into it. So even when I get on the Zoom, it says you have low this and low that, and you're going to have interruptions through your Zoom. So I'm not going to stay on because they actually want to remote into this laptop. So I just want to wish you guys all well. You guys have my cell phone number. You'll have my email address. You'll know what I look like. So anything at any time, you guys know where to get hold of me.
Okay, thank you. Hashila is our miracle worker as far as getting things getting things going. You've all been part of her administrative whirlwind. But yes, thanks, Hashila. Nice of you to sort of pop in and yeah.
All right. Well, good luck and enjoy, and yeah, we'll speak and see each other when the opportunity arises. Take care. Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you, Aslan. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Okay, so I think it would be good to get started. There are a couple of things that I'd like to chat to you about just kind of quickly before we get going. Just welcome to all of you. I'm quite sorry that we don't have a full complement, but as I said, these are contingencies that we will obviously have to deal with. But a couple of things. One of the things I would like to just mention is that this is a privilege in a way to have this space where you, particularly you, can just do research, that you have now, thanks to the NIHSS, a kind of opportunity to kind of concentrate on your research. And it is the time in your academic life where you are going to be the most productive before you get nailed by all sorts of work or teaching or other kinds of duties. So I would very much like you to take advantage as much as you can of all the various opportunities that we will try to kind of provide for you, and also that the university provides the research workshops, for instance, those kinds of things. I think they can be very useful, not only for the content that they give, but also the opportunity to kind of connect up with people. And that's one of the things that I'd very much like to be an outcome of this group, is that you have connecting relationships with one another, if you if you like. So one of the things that we have set up besides these more kind of formal symposia will be it's a process workshop. It's really just a Friday morning from 9:30 to 10:30, where it's actually our postgraduate students, the PhDs and some masters get together, and we actually just connect up and talk about what we're up to right now, talk about goals, set goals for the next week, and then feedback, you know, did we actually achieve those goals? So I will put you onto that group. It'll be, sorry, yet another WhatsApp group, but if you would like to join us, it's a Zoom meeting as well, every Friday morning, just before the Friday seminar, then you are very welcome. It's a very nice way to kind of just catch up, connect up, and actually keep the eggs warm. So that's something I'd like to just emphasize. The other thing is to keep connection with your hosts. I think that's really, really, really very important. That sometimes I know, for instance, me as a host, I am spread over so many different things that I might neglect to kind of keep up with you myself, but I very much want you to kind of connect up with me as much as possible, as much as you need to. So just, yeah, so that you don't feel like you're kind of floating off into, you know, outer space or anything, and connect up with one another. I mean, one of the things I kind of thought is that collaboration between one another might be something very interesting, and your projects are incredibly diverse, but there is a sense in which there are threads. So one thing that sprung to mind, this is a very arbitrary example, but it's something that you could think about. So for instance, if you think that Claudia is doing work at the moment on copyright and the distinction between law and justice, and what is justice when you thinking in terms of copyrighting Indigenous music, that kind of thing. Marty is doing something on justice for Palestinians. Alex is working on climate justice. Would you, for instance, consider holding then a reading group, or configuring a reading group around the question of justice? Maybe that is something that can feed into different articles, different aspects of justice. In fact, I think all of you are probably working in some sense on different ways in which justice ought to prevail. So what is justice? So that, I mean, that's just an arbitrary example, but you might find those kinds of links between the projects that you're doing, and then you may well be able to enter into sort of collaborative helping relationships with one another, where you come together, actually do something, potentially even co-write articles. So that's something that I would like to kind of try to generate amongst you. So one of the things that is obviously very much how can you say this? It's pressing upon me, because obviously my success, the success of this program, depends on your success, which is a very kind of anxiety-provoking position to be in for me. But what it means really is that, as Yaliwe said in the meet and greet, those outputs, that's what they measure you by. So those need to happen, and they need to happen soon. I don't know how to, I mean, I don't think I can overemphasize that, but in order to get 2 outputs produced at the end of your year period, that's an incredibly short time. So that's something that I would really like to just emphasize, that is something that you really, really need to start thinking about, working on, considering in a very mercenary way, in a way. Just do whatever you can to get those outputs produced, because that is what the continuation of your postdoc into the 2nd year depends on. It's what the success of the program depends on. So yeah, if you need to collaborate, if you need to speak to your host, if you need to chase people up, just this is the time to just, you know, push through with that as hard as you possibly can. And yeah, I think let us know when you do things. That would be wonderful if you can actually trigger and inspire one another by saying, hey, look, I've done this workshop, or hey, I've kind of set up the seminar thing. If there are things that you want to do in that respect also, let us know, and let's see if we can make them happen. So remember, this is now, I mean, the postdoc is the time that you are holding the reins of your own research. And if there are things that you want to do, if there are workshops you want to create, if there are reading groups you want to configure, if there's seminars or little kind of symposiums or conferences or anything that you want to initiate, then let us know, and we'll see what we can do to kind of try to, you know, help you make it happen. And any ideas for kind of how this program might want to roll out, just again, let us know. Remember, this is the beginning. This is the first time that the university has had such a program like this. So, I mean, we're not hard and fast on how it should be run. So we're very much open to ideas and thinking and collaboration, all of that. Okay, so that's probably enough from me. I just want to kind of emphasize the need to kind of produce those outputs, just, you know, so my head doesn't roll at the end of the year, and keep detailed records of the stuff that you do, because we'll need to produce these reports to the NIHSS once every 6 months. But yeah, let's not get too much into that. We'll obviously hound you for that around about September or something like that. Sheila will, you know, get onto you. Okay, but as I said, enough from me, and I would very much like to now just get our teeth really into some, you know, proper academic thinking. Is there anybody who would like to present first, or should I just call upon you as you are? just call upon you. Okay, then as you are in the list, it would be Busisiwe. So let's let you present and then have your respondent respond to you. And then, yeah, we'll take it from there. Okay, so over to you, Busisiwe. I think you're on mute. There you go.
Can I share my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Are you able to see?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Andre. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you for this time that you have given us to be able to connect with the work that we're currently busy with. What I'm going to be presenting here is what I would be hoping to be the paper that I will be writing soon, immediately after the REC-H process is done, and I'm able to do as well the I don't want to say data collection, but the workshops, the transdisciplinary workshops that I'm aiming to do. But I'm picking on this transdisciplinary pathways towards enhancing household food security. So the paper would be basically having that heading. I will just take you through, and it's sort of like an outline of what basically I'm looking into in terms of my project. But I'm putting great emphasis in terms of exploring the food security situation as well as the transdisciplinarity. So the focus of the postdoc is really on in two phases. The first phase was to determine the food security status of households at Wells Estate and to see the association between the biographical and the socioeconomic variables of the households with their level of food security. So that part of phase one has been completed. So now one is on phase two, which is to explore possible pathways that can be used to enhance the household food security of these households in Ward 60, using a participatory action and transdisciplinary approach. I think we need to explore just what is food security for clarity so that we're on the same page. Food security is when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. And food insecurity is characterized as being a problem of access by poor households. Access failure is usually understood as being the outcome of insufficient income to buy the required food. So the complexity of the challenge of food insecurity is that food insecurity is a critical global challenge. It is a societal challenge that is highly interconnected to other challenges, such as poverty and unemployment. And thus it is a multidimensional phenomenon that involves many actors. So addressing this challenge requires a multi-stakeholder collaboration. It cannot be it cannot be done just on single approaches. Hence, there's a strong emphasis on the transdisciplinary approach to research. Because it is multidimensional, we cannot just look at it, from a single disciplinary approach. So what is this transdisciplinary research? I'll just say TDR. It is a research that integrates knowledge across academic disciplines and non-academic stakeholders to address societal challenges. The end goal of TDR is societal impact, that is to contribute to the development of society and to challenges facing society. TDR provides a methodology that guides and supports the collaborations that are aimed at community interventions. TDR also encourages the fusion of knowledge as well as methodologies of different disciplines. So let's look at the policy context around food security. Achieving food security is at the forefront of the policy agenda globally, because if efforts to reduce food insecurity are not enhanced, the Sustainable Development Goals target of hunger eradication will not be achieved by 2030. In South Africa, the right to food is enshrined in the South African Constitution, which is section 27.1b of the Constitution of South Africa. And it states that everyone has the right to sufficient food and water. The National Development Plan also, which is what guides us in South Africa, identifies food and nutrition security as both a consequence and a cause of poverty and inequality. Hence, the NDP has also set targets to eradicate poverty, reduce unemployment, and eliminate inequality by 2030. Just to focus on some of the focal points of the NDP, it calls for collaborations between government, the private sector, civil society, and citizens to establish self-sustainable local food systems that would underpin universal access and utilization over time. Such an approach is envisaged to reduce hunger and poverty, increase agricultural development, and address malnutrition, which will in turn contribute towards skills development and improve inclusive economic growth and job creation. Some researchers suggest that achieving the vision of the NDP will require innovative approaches to research, policy dialogue, and practice that recognizes relationships and feedback loops in systems and how they affect food security. The current discourse around food security, the possible role and involvement of universities in addressing the challenge of food insecurity has emerged as an important focus of contemporary academic discourse, globally and locally. Universities are being challenged to engage communities and governments, the public and private sectors, and others in identifying both problems and possible solutions to food security, so as to implement measures to improve the undesirable high level of food insecurity in poorer households. Current recommendations are that universities must place an emphasis on producing graduates who understand food systems and food security concepts, and who have a good understanding of how their specialty or discipline relates to other components of the system, and who have the skills to work across disciplines in a team. So this brings us to what is it, what is the actual problem then in terms of what other studies have been saying. There's consensus from previous studies that South Africa experiences major challenges of household food insecurity in low-income communities around the cities. The results of phase 1 of the postdoc showed that the majority of the households, even in Ward 60, were food insecure. 6.1% of households were only 6.1% were food secure. 3.05% mildly food insecure, 13.4% as moderately food insecure, and 77.4% as severely food insecure. The unemployment rate was at 82.4%, and 80% reliance on social grants, and 47.6% absence of income. Also, the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19 has amplified the visibility of food insecurity. Also note that the biographical and socioeconomic factors such as income levels, gender, age, education levels, household size, and the number of children per household have an impact on the level of household food insecurity. So the sub-problems that one has identified is that Low-income suburban households in Nelson Mandela Bay are increasingly affected by socioeconomic constraints such as COVID-19, poverty and unemployment that may impact on food security. As a consequence of these adverse conditions, ordinary people struggle to meet their basic household needs. Whilst food security has become a key focus of most contemporary published research, I've not come across any research so far in Nelson Mandela Bay by academic researchers that engages the community using a bottom-up approach where a more local community ownership becomes the emphasis, and where the community, university postgraduate students, and stakeholders participate as co-researchers towards meaningful and sustainable interventions to improve the food security situation. Hence, this study engages Nelson Mandela University postgraduate students from a variety of academic disciplines and stakeholders, from non-academic disciplines to explore transdisciplinary perspectives and pathways on how the household food security situation in Wells Estate can be improved towards designing a sustainable community-driven food security intervention program for implementation that will enhance household food security at Wells Estate. So the key research question here is, how can the household food security of residents of Nelson Mandela Bay Municipality, Ward 60 be enhanced? And the sub-question is, what is the most feasible implementable intervention to improve household food security in Nelson Mandela Bay? And the goal and objectives, the first goal is to explore how the household food security situation can be improved so as to come up with a sustainable community-driven intervention that will enhance food security in Ward 60. The first objective is to explore transdisciplinary perspectives and pathways to improve household food security. And the second one is to co-develop a contextually relevant feasible intervention program for implementation. And the research design and methods is the participatory action research and transdisciplinary case study design, which will necessitate a qualitative inquiry, because the study intends to draw upon bodies of knowledge from a transdisciplinary team consisting of a variety of academic disciplines of postgraduate students and from sectors and stakeholders outside of academia. The research methodology is guided by a three-stage participatory action research framework, which is problem identification, designing solutions, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation, with each stage sequentially informing the other. So in terms of problem identification, the first phase was what was engaged, that one was engaged in previously in exploring the household food security status. So now at this current stage is designing solutions, which is about focusing on designing solutions, and it will engage the community residents, the postgraduate students, and a variety of academic and non-academic stakeholders. The third phase would be the implementation phase, monitoring and evaluation. That roughly just looks at that summarizes the sources of information, the data collection method, the information, how information will be gathered, and also the analysis. So if we look at the data collection methods there, you'll find that we'll have transdisciplinary team discussions, we'll have a participatory action and ABCD workshop, we'll have focus group discussions, and we'll have transdisciplinary team discussions. So the transdisciplinary process can be summarized thus. The step one would be forming a team, inviting researchers and stakeholders. We'll be looking at who are we involving, what are their roles, who is in the co-project team, what are the needs, interests, and expectations of those involved, what is the transdisciplinary team structure that will work. And then step 2 will be framing and analyzing the problem, engaging researchers and stakeholders. We'll look at what is the scope of the problem, how do different researchers and stakeholders define the problem. We'll co-define what the problem is and source knowledge from the stakeholders from the beginning of the process. And the step 3 will be exploring solutions and impacts. That is constructing a joint purpose and research agenda. What are the key questions that we are answering? What are we prioritizing? Where are we prioritizing our efforts? Establish the overall strategy and general work plan for knowledge production and impact on food security. Determine what possible solutions are available to address the problem. So in summary, to summarize the whole process, a collaboration of transdisciplinary multi-stakeholder project team will be established to voluntarily participate in the project. The team will enter into a participatory collaborative process in exploring transdisciplinary perspectives and pathways on how the food security situation can be improved and design an appropriate intervention program. Transdisciplinary workshops and transdisciplinary discussions by the transdisciplinary team will be engaged to share findings of phase 1 of the research project, to afford the community of WELS to share its vision, mission, and objectives and activities, to give an opportunity to all non-academic and academic stakeholders to make presentations on their activities and how they can contribute towards enhancing food security at WELS, to give an opportunity to postgraduate students to present how their research can contribute towards enhancing food security at WELS. Stakeholders will be divided into 3 focus groups to address the question of how the food insecurity situation at WELS can be improved. Transdisciplinary perspectives to improve household food security outlined from the workshop will be divided into various pathways and an action plan will be established. So in summary, the summary of the transdisciplinary research methodology is illustrated in the previous slides above. The transdisciplinary research process involves engaging stakeholders in significant ways throughout the research process, rather than collecting data and informing stakeholders afterwards. And in summary, transdisciplinarity is about co-creation of partnerships, co-defining what the problem is, and really sourcing knowledge from the stakeholders from the beginning of the research project. It is about co-production of knowledge. Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of our presentation, and I look forward to your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Busisiwe. That was wonderful, very clear. What I'm going to do before we open up for comments and questions is just to ask the person who is your official respondent to respond to you. Would you mind kind of unsharing your screen?
Okay.
Okay, great. And I'm not sure who is partnered up with you. Is it, oh, Marty, hi. Okay, good, awesome. So over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Busisiwe, and I agree with you, Andrea. It's really an inspiring project, much necessary in our country. I particularly like the transdisciplinary approach, the bottom-up, the grassroots work, and that it's about co-production of knowledge. And I think you explained the project and the specific phase in your project very clearly to us. I have a few questions though, and it's basically because I'm new to your project. As I read through the slides and also the piece that you sent me, I was asking myself, why did you select WELS? Where exactly is it? And why did you select that? So I think when you come to the point where you actually publish about this project, readers would be interested, you know, in the significance of and your choice of community to work in. Yeah, let me just also add, I'm very, the transdisciplinary approach involving non-academic actors, not simply involving them, but placing ownership with non-academic, with the people who will be affected. I think that it's such a suitable research strategy that you have. It is a case study. I was wondering if you gave consideration about, I mean, somewhere also I read that you want to use the knowledge that you gain from this phase, this case study, also in other places. So obviously, a case study can never be replicated because it's different circumstances, different peoples, but there are a lot of learnings that one can get out of a case study. So maybe if you can also reflect, and maybe you have already done so, and maybe you did not have the time to go into it now in the presentation, but what can be replicated and what cannot be replicated from a case study, and the kind of academic tools that we have to prove that the knowledge that we gain from a case study is indeed scientific. It may not be replicable, but it could be dependable or trustworthy or have credibility or whatever. But what those tools are and how you will measure the scientific integrity of your research. I think that is, especially when you publish, people will be interested in that, because I think you take on a project that is so crucial in this country, so that you quantify for us in a way, or describe for us what can we take from this case study once you have done it. I think that's more or less what I want to say. Let's see if there was something else. No, I don't think so. I'm very excited, and I'm keen to hear about questions from other people. But I feel privileged to be your respondent in this project, because as we said on email, both of us are interested in making this world a better place for other people. So thank you so much for what you do.
Fab, thanks, Marty. That was so. Busisiwe, would you like to kind of respond to those comments first before we open up for discussion?
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Marty, for those provoking questions. I think the first question is why Wells and the significance of the choice. Wells Estate is in Ward 60. I stay in Ward 60 also, but I stay on the urban side of Ward 60. Then the township that is also part of Ward 60 is Wells Estate. So Bluewater Bay and Wells Estate constitute Ward 60. So of interest to me, it's, I've watched with much I could say compassion, as I said, I think just mentioned, you see people roaming around the streets of the suburban area, and they are seeking for jobs, and they are eating from dustbins. It's a situation that is not tolerable. And you realize that these are the people that are in our neighborhood. And that prompted me to really find out what is actually happening. So I was very curious, and I relocated to Wells Estate, just to be amongst the people to find out what is actually happening in that community. And what was consistently coming out was that, people go to sleep without food. And that's what prompted, the whole research in terms of exploring the level and the food security status of the area. And it's culminating now towards seeking solutions in terms of what can be done, because one is able to realize that even though it's just one place, most of the suburban areas around cities possibly are also, as we see that there's consensus from research, that suburban households are hit by food insecurity. So it is a general challenge. And the other question is about the case study in terms of how can it be replicated, because it's a case study. So how can the information be replicated? I believe that as we are co-sharing knowledge, we are co-producing knowledge, and the type of knowledge that we are going to be co-producing is going to contribute to the body of knowledge. And whatever papers that will be produced, whatever we are able to come up with in terms of how the situation can be enhanced, can be a sort of like a springboard in terms of assisting other suburban households that are also, under the same situation. As we put the papers that we are writing, as we find out the solutions, as we contribute to the body of knowledge, I do realize that it can also be replicated elsewhere. Some of these situations can really be, can actually contribute in terms of how other communities can also establish themselves around this. I don't want to preempt what will come out, but I do imagine that whatever really comes out will also assist other communities in one way or the other, even though we don't quite do the research itself in other areas. And I think that the most difficult question is about how do we measure scientific integrity in terms of the whole process. But what I can say is that because it's not one person analyzing, it's not one person's methodology, it's not one person actually biased in terms of what needs to be done, because there are also academic postgraduate students. They are also contributing in terms of their research, in terms of how related it is to food security. So the scientific base will come from the outcomes of the research process itself and the recommendations that they will have in terms of how the food security situation can be enhanced. I'm not sure whether I'm able to answer you perfectly.
We're slightly, slightly edgy about time.
Sorry.
That was actually, I think those were wonderful answers. What I'm hearing is this wonderful metaphor of the mycelium, the kind of that contribution to a process of research where you just add and grow and it develops and it networks and all of that. So very much a complexity metaphor going there, which I'm very much liking to hear, being my kind of philosophical thematic. Mvuzo and Alex, we haven't heard from you at all yet, so I'd very much like to hear just brief comments from each of you before we move on. Mvuzo, perhaps you first.
Thank you, Andrea. I think what I'd like to maybe say is I'm just a bit lost when it comes to the transdisciplinary approach. How exactly would that, it was covered a bit, like how exactly would that come about? Especially if you, like, I really do like the themes here and the whole angle of the research, and possibly using a bottom-up approach, working with communities, because it's part of what I do as well. So I really do like that. I think some detail on how the transdisciplinary approach is going to add to finding solutions, especially when it's added to this bottom-up approach. How is this all going to fit together? I think I'm not quite clear in terms of how it's all fit together. Yeah, I think that's the only thing that I have in mind at this point.
Thanks, Mbuzo. We're kind of losing sound a bit, but I guess just a little bit more clarity on the how you will enact a transdisciplinary kind of research.
Okay, thank you, Mvuzo. I think you heard me mention that there are postgraduate students that are involved from various disciplines. So one from economic development, one from agriculture, one from arts, one from, but they are coming from different various departments, and they are actually also doing some sort of research around issues of food security. So what they come up with in terms of that research will assist, because they will also be able to table what their findings are in terms of what they are busy with. And that will assist in contributing to the solutions of how do we actually enhance the food security situation in the community. I hope that answers you.
Yeah, thanks.
Just a quick follow-up, Andre, if you don't mind. How does that come into?
So, okay, quick.
Sorry, very, very quickly. And how do you then put all of that together, those various researchers into your own research? How does that come together in your own work?
I think you heard me saying that we'll have transdisciplinary workshops and we'll have transdisciplinary discussions where we will get the different perspectives. So we'll have an agricultural perspective and a pathway. We'll have an economic perspective and a pathway. So we will define the different pathways from the different portfolios in terms of how to enhance food security.
Okay, quickly a word from Alex, and then we really do have to move.
Thanks for that. Enjoyed the presentation, and yeah, it seems like really important work. It made me think of my host's work. So Janet Cherry, she's doing work in Kwazakele, and there's like a community action research team that is made up of community members who kind of looked into questions around community-owned renewable energy, food production, waste, and so on. There's an interesting model, I think, there, so it might be worth engaging with them, because I think there's a lot of parallels that I see there, so definitely worth checking out. I can even see if I can dig up, I've got an article tucked away, so which I can share in the chat. Thanks. But yeah, excellent. Very, very exciting research, so thanks for sharing.
Okay, thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's this is exactly kind of the forum that one is hoping for, these kind of productive connections that might or might not happen. So Busisiwe, thank you so much. That was a wonderful start to our symposium. As always, I'm going to have to chase us because of time. You know, as academics, we could actually be chattering on all day, but we do need to kind of move a little bit. So maybe I should ask Marty to present. Sound again, Marty?
Unmute.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to open a Word document here. Yeah, so let me first say my project is about Zionism in Christianity and different church positions. But in this, the piece that I sent to Busisiwe is an idea that I pitched for a conference in Old Testament studies here at Stellenbosch University, but it will be an international conference. And in this article, I want to ask basically a broad question. The basic question is, can one serve God and the oppression of the Palestinians? That is the key question that drives this article, and I want to look in this article at different kinds of Zionism that we find amongst Christians, and also different kinds of theologies, and keep on asking that question. So that's just the bigger picture of what I want to do. So I will just briefly walk you now through my thinking. It's still very sketchy, but I'll explain it. So it is now more than 70 years since the Nakba, that is the Arabic word for catastrophe, of 1948, when the Palestinians lost their human rights and their homeland with the establishment of the State of Israel. Now today, the Nakba is generally understood as an ongoing and a multifaceted crisis, which has actually become part of the Palestinian condition. Now, the trouble from the perspective of the work that I'm doing is that throughout this time, the Christian faith has been used, I could also say has been weaponized to provide a theological basis for the establishment of Israel as a Jewish-only state on the territory of historic Palestine. And it has also become has been used as a justification, the Christian faith, for Israel's systemic and decades-long oppression of Palestinians. So, as I said in the beginning, in this paper, I would like to distinguish between different kinds of Zionism amongst Christians, and also between different kinds of theological responses to Israel's relation to the Palestinians, to reflect on whether it is possible for Christians to serve God and the oppression of the Palestinians. And I shall argue in this article that the theological and the ecclesial, or that is the church support for Zionism as a rationale for state violence, actually brings Christianity to a crisis, which compares to that of the role of Christianity in justifying South African apartheid. So I'm going to draw on two recent resolutions. One is a resolution, the other is a global statement. The one is by the General Council of the World Communion of Reformed Churches. It was taken in Action 55 in Leipzig in 2017. This, the Reformed Churches of the world represents about 100 million people. That's the one resolution that I want to draw from. The other one is the Cry for Hope call that was issued by the Palestinian Christians and also by a global coalition of academics and clergy, but not only Christians, mostly Christians, but also some Jews, that is known as the 2020 Cry for Hope call. And through the lens of these two, the one, the resolution, the other, the statement, I want to reflect on Zionism as a political and a theologically based ideology. And I want the argument that I will step by step build is that by using the Christian faith to justify the oppression of an entire people compromises the integrity of the Christian faith. It compromises also the credibility of the gospel and also the mission and the role of Christianity and its churches. So in a way, I think well, I will argue in the paper that the Nakba, and I will tell a story about that right now. The Nakba, or the Palestinian catastrophe, is not only a catastrophe for Palestinians, but it can be seen, if we see the role of global Christianity in this crisis, then it has become also, and it can be seen also as a catastrophe for Christianity, if the Christian faith is used to justify the oppression of Christians. And I think as South Africans, there's, you know, we can associate with this how how the Christian faith can be abused to justify racial oppression. So I started to write the article, and just a note on the writing is, and also on my pitch for this conference, I have already participated in many conferences and I've written many papers, and the more I do it, the more I understand that my topics tend to be too broad, and that I really need to hone in onto a tiny slice or a tiny issue and unpack that properly. So as I started to work, and I really want to credit with CISWE, because in our toing and throwing before this discussion, I realized, no, I must make my topic smaller. So I wanted to paint a far more global picture. But I'm just going to answer this question in this paper, is whether one can serve God and the oppression of the Palestinians. Now, if one looks at the situation from the perspective, this is the first point I'm making in the article, from the perspective of the Christian Palestinians, for them, the Nakba, the Nakba meant the depopulation and the destruction of hundreds, over 500 of Palestinian villages, all the urban areas, the looting of banks, pretty much what we're now seeing playing out in the Ukraine, played out in Palestine in 1948. And hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, 85% of Palestinians on what is now Israel, 85% of those Palestinians became refugees. But from the perspective of the Palestinian Christians, this crisis was not only an identity, a human catastrophe of being displaced by Israel. It was also not just an identity catastrophe of no longer knowing where you fit in or may live, but it was also a theological catastrophe because their own religion was weaponized by fellow Christians, other Christians in the world, to justify their oppression. But since 1948, the situation has actually worsened. And we understand now that Israel is not interested not only in the 78% of Palestine that it took in 1948, but in 100% of it. And that this ongoing catastrophe is also about the killing of memory, the silencing of those who tell the truth, and also the harassment of those who want to publicly mourn the death of people who report the ongoing Nakba, as we saw about 10 days ago with the killing of the Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. So then I will unpack. I will go into the ethical and moral dimension also of the Nakba, and I will argue that Zionism has become part of a global project of empire. And then I see my time is almost up. That I will unpack different kinds of Zionism. I, for instance, used to be a Zionist and I didn't know it. I didn't believe in end times theology, but I believed in many myths and misinformation. So I'll unpack all of those different kinds of Holocaust theology, apocalyptic reading of the Bible, a literal reading of the Bible, the myths and misinformation, the unconscious Zionism. I'll unpack all of those. And then I will look at the South African church struggle and how theologians in our time, under the apartheid regime, criticized churches' responses. how they identified a theology, they named state theology, which basically describes a warrior God, and a church theology, that is the neutral God, the silent God, and continue to ask the question, you know, how would these Christians answer the question, can one serve God and the oppression of the Palestinians? Obviously, these Christians would say this, yes. But then, and this is where the theological analysis then will come in, because this is an Old Testament conference, and I need to learn a lot to be able to do that, because my field is actually ethics, not really, I didn't train as a minister. To talk about what is a responsible, what is an ethical, what is a Christ-centered reading of the Bible. So I still need to read and study a lot about that. I'm going to learn a lot. And then I will tie all the knots and argue why this is a catastrophe for Christianity, the world's Christianity, and maybe make some concluding remarks on the double standards in our world in terms of international law, our politicians that pursue power and greed, and the rest of us who feed them with that kind of consciousness. And I also, from the beginning, wanted to reflect on what can make it better, but I think that will be a different article. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Marty, for that. That sounds like about 4 articles in one already.
Yeah.
So before we open to Alex and Mvuzo and Busisiwe, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Marty, for that very interesting presentation. It's quite a sensitive issue that you're dealing with, but yeah, it's very much thought-provoking. And as I read your paper, I was very keen, you know, to looking forward to hearing more about what you will actually get from the literature and even in other perspectives. But I'm just curious to know what motivated you, you know, in terms of writing this article. What is the motive behind, and what are you hoping to achieve? I can see that for now, the dominant perspective is the perspective that is pro-Palestinian. And I'm wondering whether, you know, whether you will get a pro-Zionist perspective, and how will you actually tie those two together? I think that was just my concern. Let me give you an opportunity.
Okay, yeah, well, that is the whole theological thing. You know, does one argue for oppression and for injustice in Christianity or against it? And when one analyzes Zionism, which is an imperial project, it's basically invading the land and taking houses and resources and everything away from a people, making them refugees and reducing them to second-class citizens on the basis of race. There's a lot in the literature about what that can be called, and increasingly, especially since last year, we have major bodies in the world and organizations such as Human Rights Watch, an Israeli human rights organization also called B'Tselem, and Amnesty International, but there are also many other reports that step by step systematically describe Israel's relation in terms of the Palestinians as apartheid. Not apartheid in terms of what happened in South Africa, not in comparison to the South African case, but in terms of how international law defines apartheid. And we had a church struggle in South Africa during apartheid. times. You know, in our country, both the oppressed and the oppressor claimed loyalty to Christianity. So today, in terms of Israel, we have millions of Christians who say that Israel's oppression of the Palestinians is God's will. Okay, so the theological question is can one say that? And that is what I will be unpacking in this article. And I know that this is actually many people see it as a controversial issue. I get lots of hate mail and attacks, and when I try to present a seminar, when I wanted to present a seminar, I did in the end, but the university was attacked by people who did not agree that I could talk about these things or teach people about it. It is a very contentious issue, but the reason why I'm doing, you ask me, why am I doing this, is I cannot, as a white South African and as a Christian, allow another system of apartheid in this world. And I feel a special, I witnessed, well, I monitored human rights violations in Palestine and Israel for 3 months, 11 years ago. And so I have grassroots experience of the systemic discrimination. And it was far worse than I could ever imagine. And most people who is familiar with it say it's far worse than it was in South Africa. It's not for me to say that because I was not on the receiving side of apartheid here. But it is horrific. The bombs, the bullets, and it doesn't reach the media. So it is time. I tried to work with many churches in South Africa, and several of our churches have already taken very progressive stances on realizing what Israel is doing and that we cannot, as Christians, condone it. But some Christians, some churches are silent. Most are silent. Many churches actually promote Israel's injustices. And I feel very upset that that is happening in the world, but especially in South Africa. So for me, I call myself a scholar activist. I'm not just an armchair scientist. I try to influence policy through my academic work. So it's very much empirical work also. So in this project, I'm studying policies of churches, but I'm still contemplating whether I should do this paper in Afrikaans or in English. Obviously at the conference, I'll speak in English, but maybe I will write it in Afrikaans, to publish it in Afrikaans, because people don't know what is happening there. South Africans just don't know. And we have so many problems that people don't bother to know. And yet it's very, very close to home. Sorry for the long answer.
No, it's a wonderful answer. Thanks, Marty. Belinda, you have your hand up?
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, Marty, I just want to say that I'm very interested in what you're doing. I think it's a very important project that you're undertaking. You mentioned that you sometimes think too big and you need to, tone down. If you ever need a critical reader just to, reflect back to you, Andrea said we should, work together in this group. I'm very much interested in what you're doing. I'm quite interested in the theological and the spiritual kind of angles to what's going on in the world. I'm not trained in theology, but I've done quite a lot of work on the concept of compassion. So if you ever do just need somebody, en ek praat Afrikaans, so as jy in Afrikaans skryf, sal ek vir jou kan help lees daar. So by all means, if you need somebody to fall back on, I'd be more than happy to read for you, also because I'm very interested in what you're doing and I'd love to read what you say. And then just 2 quick other thoughts. I've been doing a lot of reading at the moment lately about the little thing called the Spanish Inquisition that a lot of people seem to have forgotten about. And I've just come across the interesting piece of information that when the Inquisition tortured people, they would have an image of Christ on the cross in the room, but they would cover that image so that Christ would not see the violence that is being committed in his name. And to me, that was just such a, such an absolutely shocking idea. And I think that that's so true of what you are, writing about, this kind of blind faith, but losing the idea of actually it's being committed in the name of, a symbol of peace and hope and all of that. And then one last suggestion. I don't know if you've come across the novel. My background is mostly literature and film studies. There's a relatively recent novel by Colin McCann called I, Paragon. I'll put it in the group.
Yes, I read it.
Have you read it? Okay, because I just thought that's an incredible reflection on the two sides and how, how there's so much in common in the grief and the pain that people experience on two sides. Thank you very much. I think you're doing wonderful work and I look forward to seeing how that will develop. Thanks, Andrea.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Belinda. Marty, would you like to sort of comment on that, or shall we ask Alex? His hand is up.
I just want to say thank you for the offer. It's wonderful to be for someone to offer reading stuff, because one gets so familiar with what you do that you forget what the questions of others. So thank you so much. I actually value every single question. Dankie, Belinda. Ek sal op jou reken.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, thank you, Belinda. I'd love to set up these kind of collaborative relationships between us all. I think it will be fabulous. Okay, great. Alex.
Yeah, thanks for that, Marty. I thought I'd just comment on this question of feeling that your work sometimes may be a little bit too radical and then you might need to turn it down. Because I also do a lot of activist scholarship. And I think there is this tension where in a lot of academic space, you're kind of pushed to adopting more academic language, which is often seen as more neutral. But I worry that that's maybe a bug of academia rather than a positive element, because it's trying to describe, situations that are neutral using neutral language makes you kind of, side on the side of the oppressor, to borrow that quote right from Bishop Desmond Tutu. So I think, yeah, it's just interesting to think about how one holds that tension and ensures that you use the right sort of language that doesn't feign neutrality in a space where neutrality, doesn't exist, particularly in very heated discussions like yours. So I think the fact that you're getting pushback is probably a good sign rather than a bad one. If putting fellow activist hats on, I just thought I'd say that.
Thanks, Alex. Marty?
Yeah, no, Alex is hitting the nail on the head, and that is actually another article that I planned for this year. Is the issue on, can one take sides in scholarly work or not? And I will argue that you can, that you also have a moral, that the scientific integrity also has a moral dimension. And that if you are going to argue in science, for example, that justice and injustice are, are equally important or equally valid, then I think you miss the moral dimension of science. If we are going to argue that gender discrimination is a neutral thing, I think we miss, there's no integrity in one's scientific work. So I will use those arguments to argue why one can, why one, nothing is neutral. There's no such thing, especially in human sciences, as neutrality, but you have to declare your position and convince your reader in scientific terms that what you say is valid and that you actually take on misinformation. It's not a matter of either this or that, not at all. So thanks, Alex.
Awesome, great. Mvuzo, can we hear your voice?
Yes, mine is a simple question. Marty, are you Jewish? Because the reason I ask that, I'm thinking because of the sensitivity of the topic in hand. I don't know. Might it be easier for you to critique from the inside, especially if you are? I get that you are Christian. I guess my question is, are you then Jewish? Because it might make it easier to bring the argument, especially if it's made from the inside, given the sensitive nature of the topic.
So I'm not Jewish, but I work with many Jewish scholars and theologians in South Africa, but also elsewhere in the world. It is very hard for them. They are called traitors when they speak to fellow Jews. They are really, really, really harassed. They lose friends, family, experience social isolation, get death threats, and so on. I don't get death threats, but I get some of that from fellow Christians and also from Jews. So no, I speak from with a scientific voice, but also with a Christian voice, and I work with Muslims, with Christians, with people of no faith, with anyone who share similar values, and that is that equality and justice and compassion are human, all of us need and have the right to the same compassion and equality and justice and honesty. So I do not, my work is not to convince people. I cannot do that. Individuals have to convince themselves. That's not my work. My work is to do the scientific unpacking, to sensitize and to make aware. I don't think I can change anything or anyone, but I will not be silent.
Marty, thanks very much for that. Just a quick technical question. I wish Gary was here to just chat to you, because I don't know enough, but one of the things that he says very often is that the thing that fascinates him about the Palestinian situation is that it's not oppression on the basis of race, because racially Jewish people and Palestinians are exactly, there's no racial difference. So it's not a race thing. It's something else. He finds that fascinating. So it's just a quick question, question there. What is the grounds of this conflict? It's a battle between brothers, it seems.
Yeah, I'm reading a very interesting article right now that unpacks that question on why is it racial? And I'm going to read all the reports of Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, all the recent reports, because they clearly come to the it's not just skin color. Racism is not understood, just to summarize it, as simply skin color. I mean, there are Jews that are black, who converted, Africans who converted to Judaism. There are Jews that are Semites. There are Jews that are from all over the world. In Israel, to qualify as a Jew There's no racial qualification. All you have to do is you have to speak modern Hebrew and declare yourself as Jewish. That's all. No religion, no race, no nothing. But it's an identity thing. And the discriminatory aspect of apartheid sits in identity. That identity, and so it's also culture and an identification with it's not an ethnic group, but it's an identification with an identity that puts you in a superior position to someone who does not identify with that identity.
Okay, excellent. Thanks. There's a paper for you. Another article.
And Andrea, do you have a second for me to just jump in there?
Quick second, Belinda. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Marty, you would probably be familiar with the work of Karen Armstrong. I find that what she says about fundamentalism is so enlightening. She always says that any kind of fundamentalism always originates in an in-group. So it's always originally a more enlightened group that becomes perceived as a threat to a more traditional group. And from that, it circles out to everybody else or everybody who associates with the splinter group or whatever. And I find that explains so much of a lot of these, kind of tensions and violence that we see, where it's not always about the other. It's very often about, the group within our in-group that actually associates with slightly different teachings or a slightly different reading of the religious text or whatever. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Belinda. Would everyone like a sort of a 5-minute, quick break, comfort break? I very much need to kind of dash off for 5 minutes, and then we'll reconvene with Alex and Vuzo. Okay, all right. So see you in, at 11-ish. Yes, okay. Hello. Okay. Hope everyone is back with us. Alex, hi. Good. Just made my nice warm cup of coffee.
Nice, enjoy. Okay.
Mvuzo is sharing screen. Okay, great. So I guess we'll start with you, Mvuzo. Okay. Is everyone back with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Belinda's here, great. So we're Marty's here, great, and used to see we're great, awesome. Okay, so let's begin then with Mvuzo.
Thank you, Andrea. I thought to share my screen a bit so that people have a sense of what I look like. The reason I don't have my video on is because I don't trust my connection enough to have audio and video on.
That's fine. Yeah, your sound is slightly what is it, unstable, so I think it's a good idea to keep the video off. Yeah.
Okay, I'll keep it off then. That might be better. Right. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm presenting today on the importance of public partnerships in community work and engagement work. The title is taken from some of the data that we're working with. It comes from a project within the sciences, you know, because I think there's a line there called what they do, you know, the workforce continuum. Linda found this cool, and I think afterwards thought about it, and I thought it makes for a good title. Before anything, I thought to start off by explaining my entry point to scholarship of engagement and how I relate to it and what I find important about such work. It's a reflection of a growing scholarship, you know, in terms of broadening public aspects of academia. It's a response, and I get a lot. I get why this response is very important. Response to the disconnect between academics and the public, and finding ways, and it's also about finding ways to work for public good and generate knowledge with public participation. I find that very important. It strives for collaboration in the production of knowledge with communities. And so instead of seeing the public as a passive recipient of knowledge, engaged scholarship stresses the fact that the public can contribute to its creation. This takes a lot from my background in media study, because I worked with audience study, which was a pushback to say that people are not passive recipients of information. They're very active and they understand it in different ways. So I found, you know, this is how I find myself involved in engagement work, because of these ideas of knowing that people are finding importance in the fact that people are very, very active. And if you engage them in terms of the problems, a lot of times you get a sense of what the solution might be as well. What I also found interesting in terms of engaging with this work is the fact that engagement is a third core function in terms of how universities see themselves, alongside teaching and learning and research. Okay, so I think a lot of universities, or certainly the ones that I've been exposed to, see community engagement as a third function of a university. And then everyone understands its value, and the fact that universities have to be part of the solutions and practical solutions to problems. And by working, and I think by working in communities, I think I've touched on this. By working in communities, scholars can broaden horizons and generate so much more questions, so much more answers and solutions. Because it's not just one or two people in offices to try and solve all the problems, but it's also working with so many people, which can bring about so much. Sorry about that. And so there's then been an effort from engaged scholarship to really make the area a bit more rigorous, so that it can meet standards of traditional academic scholarship. All right, so there's an effort to kind of institutionalize and make the area a bit more academic, because I think a lot of times it's based on projects to people who, not in their spare time, but sometimes outside of research. So there's a conscious effort now to ensure that the engagement projects are also part of research and scholarship. I think this is the point that I wanted to make in the previous slide. The fact that, as I said, engagement is a third core function, but it's treated a lot of times as a cousin of the other two. And so it's not given as much weight, it's not given as much funding and resources as the other two. And this is despite the fact that engagement scholars are often involved in critical work that benefits communities and benefits the university. This is not formally recorded as scholarship. Oftentimes, it's projects on the side. And a project that I'm involved in with Linda, we have then taken upon ourselves responsibility to address this imbalance and try to do the work of ensuring that the engagement work is seen as scholarship and can be converted to scholarship. So the project then aims to capacitate project leaders. These are different university faculties and departments that have projects that have engagement projects ongoing. Some of them, for example, people in sciences who do not have capabilities of publishing and writing up these projects, who would then step in and help them to do so, to ensure that the work that they do is also captured as academic scholarship. One of these projects, the first of our project is the STEM pipeline project. So we recently had a meeting with Isabel, who's a project leader in the STEM pipeline project. The project is a partnership between NMU and Sandal, and it aims to improve the marks of students in sciences and mathematics from grade 10 to 12, so that more learners can qualify to study in university, science, and engineering. The partnership came about when Sandal recognized the lack of engineers produced in the school system. And so they started funding programs to prepare learners for careers in science, technology, engineering, related management, and mathematics, which is where STEM comes from. So part of the rationale then is, and this is something that I like, is the fact that it's also, they have in mind the fact that this will create economic opportunities instead of a lot of students, especially for more disadvantaged backgrounds, maybe falling out of the system. If you have these opportunities in place and the support for students, a lot of them can go through this high school system and university system and end up qualifying for jobs in the sciences. They've got many examples of students that came from the worst of circumstances and ended up in sciences and have made it to various fields. You know, so it's about eradication of poverty and the creation of employment, which is something valuable. And then ultimately the partnerships are there to promote. I think the reason why I included this line, the partnership promote development of human capital capacity building. I think a lot of community work is about development of human capital and the building of capacity. In this case, I think I want to zone in on the fact that it's about the importance of community partnerships in building capacity and development of human capital. All right. And so this is some of the theory that I'm using, especially to just draw, just to paint a picture of, for example, where the scholarship is. And so there's an article by Barker, for example, that talks about five practices of the engagement. And the first is the fact that it can incorporate forums, for example, which means that the scholarship is about engagement with the public and making sure whatever it's done, whatever research is can be shared with a larger audience. It's participatory. And third, this is where I'm going to be mostly focused on, especially when writing an article about this same project, about community partnerships. And the reason I found that important is because I think the sense of engagement being broader than just community engagement is one that I got when I started working at certainly with Linda and this postdoc project. I think I've always thought about engagement as community engagement, working with disadvantaged communities. I think the reason why I'm so I'm interested, especially in this first paper, is I think painting a picture. And I think there's a lot of people, many like myself, who think about engagement in that limited sense. So I think it's focusing on this third aspect of community engagement practice, which is it can also be about community partnerships. And the fact that engagement work can be partnerships with industry. You know, so this NMU-SANRAL partnership together with various high schools, I think, is one that shows the value of community partnerships in engaging with communities and, you know, doing the work of eradicating poverty and working with the disadvantage of communities. So the fourth practice is information networks, where people get resources and provide information and databases. And I think there's examples. I think there's various government departments, maybe CETAs and such things, that do this work where information is made available to the public. Then lastly, scholarship engagement is about civil skills. I'm just going through this taxonomy just to give you a sense of the 5 practices. One that project, or certainly the first paper that Linda and I will be writing, will focus on this third practice, which is community partnerships. And then in conclusion, in terms of what we talk about when we say capacity, it's just basically working with different projects. The first project is this STEM PP, working with them to enable them to then write up what they have been doing. This first project, for example, or the notes and the reports that we've given is I think about 10 years worth of work. And I don't think any of it has been published. So we would then step in and judging from what we've seen, there's probably book that can be written about the work that Isabel and the STEM project has done. Then I think we will distill what we can to about 2 papers, and I think that gives you a sense of how so much important work is being done, and certainly not enough of it is being published. We want to step in and help with the work of saying that this is very important work, engaging with communities. How can we then step in and make sure that it's made available to the scholarly community as well? And so they've it's an example, as I said, of community partnership, NMU Sandral, engaging with schools to speak to social issues, such as elevation of poverty, help high school, and filling a gap, which is skills shortage in the sciences. And then the efforts. So lastly, I think these efforts really, and I think in my mind, deserve serious study, because there's so much good work going into these projects. And it will be, I think it's now my ambition to have this work come to light. Thank you. That's the presentation.
Perfect. Thanks, Mvuzo. Lots to think about there. I'm not going to jump in yet. Would you mind unsharing your screen, and then we'll ask Alex to come up and comment? Thanks, Alex.
Oh, thank you so much, Mvuzo. That was really interesting. I was particularly interested in your thoughts on engaged scholarships. I'm going to focus a little bit on those in my comments. But yeah, I really appreciated your thinking through those. One thing that struck me is how your project's departure points talk about how engagement is widely recognized as a core function of higher education. And then I was reflecting a bit on how our own postdoc program, which is supposed to be transdisciplinary, its main measurements for output is research outputs, essentially, right? And so how do we see that in our own program? Is there ways that we can make that more of a reality? So I thought that was an interesting point. And then one of the other elements in the taxonomy is that you talked about how participatory research stresses the active role citizens can play in the production of academic knowledge. And one of the things I think about when it comes to like engaged scholarship is that, is it just academic knowledge that we're trying to produce, or is it other forms of maybe more accessible knowledge that is part of the aim? And like, what constitutes academic knowledge? And is that the sort of knowledge that communities are really interested in? Is it the academic knowledge, or is it much more accessible and applicable? And I guess there's a question there on how do we even define what constitutes academic knowledge or not? So yeah, I thought that was quite interesting. And then what else? You talked about how the engagement strives for reciprocal and collaborative knowledge production. I thought that was really important, that you're collaborating with communities as you produce knowledge. And I guess one of the challenges we probably face in the sphere is that the history of engagement is not one of reciprocity and collaboration in the sort of rich sense, often one of extraction, right? So I think part of the work maybe also has to do with rebuilding trust so that we can develop relationships of reciprocity. And if my internet starts kicking out, just let me know. It's been acting a little funny. I see some people are freezing up a bit. Let me turn off my camera.
Yeah, you're sounding fine, Alex. We can kind of hear you, and you're not. Your sound is a little bit jumpy, but I mean, you're fine. You're clear. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, my internet in there, so sorry about that. Where was I? So, and then one other element I was thinking about in terms of cross collaboration is, I've seen some there. It's not quite reciprocity. There's a sense of like saviorism that plays out sometimes. So what I was thinking, what are the intellectual virtues we should aspire towards when we do engaged scholarship? One maybe like humility, one of like really embracing the knowledge of your community that you're engaging with, and knowing that they may have a deeper understanding of the problems facing the issues that we're trying to address, and may have stronger insights on how to fix them that maybe sometimes us coming from the outside might. So yeah, what are those intellectual virtues that we should aspire towards? Was my other question there. And that kind of connected to this idea that engagement practitioners are seen as change agents at a grassroots level and are not recognized for it, is what you said in the in your piece. And yeah, I think that can be true. Like sometimes engaged academics can be change agents, but other times, you know, we're working on understanding those that are the real change agents in community. So how do we, you know, play that different role? And one of the things I was thinking is, if we're trying to make change in this work that we're doing, I'm sorry, these are all quite philosophical reflections, but I am a philosopher, so maybe that's why it's the case. But then I was thinking, if we're trying to be change agents in communities, what mechanisms are there for accountability, right? Because if we're trying to push for change, how do communities then hold us accountable and the institutions that we represent? So how do we build that into our work as we try to do engaged scholarship? So yeah, maybe those are just some questions to think about as we try to think deeper about what engaged scholarship looks like and how we model it. But Mvuzo, I think you're doing some really cool work to start to think of that and define that as you dive into thinking about this this work with the Samarol Science Pipeline Project. So I'm glad that that you brought up all these interesting taxonomies and definitions. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Alex. Mvuzo, would you like to respond quickly before we ask Marty and Busisiwe to weigh in?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Alex, for the response. I'm not sure if I'm going to cover everything that you and please do pose the questions to me again if I don't cover everything, because I wasn't able to capture it all. And a part of that is because I think I was stuck on the first point that you raised in terms of the making the work accessible and what we mean by that. And I think that's very important. It's an interesting point, and it's something for me to think about greatly. I think at this point, what I can say about that is I recognize the work of maybe building engagement to an extent where it's on a level playing field with the other two core functions of I find that incredibly important, because in my mind, universities should be playing the role of engaging. So I'm glad that it's recognized as a core function. So I think I want to be part of the push then to make sure that it's only seen as such, but can play and can be important enough to play the role that it's supposed to by being funded enough and in time to do so, and projects being recognized. And so I think part of making the work accessible now can be in the academic sphere, not necessarily in the popular sphere. For example, we could write articles for newspapers and produce whatever documentaries and so forth to make sure that the work is accessible. Because I think that's actually part of the push in terms of engaging with communities, ensuring that work is not just locked up in journals and in books and libraries, but made available to people. So I think it's a two-pronged approach. In terms of what you've raised, I think it's the work of making sure that the work is converted into academic scholarship, and certainly in terms of what you've raised, the work also being made accessible to others. And thinking about your last point in terms of change agents being accountable, I do think that it's important to be involved in communities and trying as much as possible to be practical and find solutions to practical problems, working together with communities. How then you become accountable to those people? I guess at this stage, I haven't had enough time to think about this, is that when you are working with people and you are collaborating and you are accountable, I think by default you become accountable to those people because it's a collective project. So you need to build the strategies that are going to have the meetings, for example, have the structures in place, which will make you then accountable. So you're not just going in there and extracting information and then just going up right, but you are working together, and that's part of the participatory approach of this research. If you're working with to build strategies where you can be accountable to people, because it's not just your project, you're working together with the people involved. That's a bit different in terms of what I'm doing now, because I think the work that Linda and I are doing and how we've thought about the project, that we are going to help write projects that are and not necessarily do an engaged project out.
Mvuzo, thanks. We're struggling a little bit with sound, but
I wonder.
It's okay. We'll just kind of so maybe just a quick metaphor from me. I'm very much like the metaphor of laminations, like layers and layers and layers of different kinds of academic production that kind of build upon one another, and you can see through them, almost like that palimpsest. Maybe that's even a nice metaphor too. But I like the metaphor of laminations in this kind of academic production, where there are so many different levels and layers of activity that feed into the whole idea of academic production. So maybe that's something to think about. Could I ask Marty for a comment?
Yeah, I also struggle to hear, but I think it's worthwhile to think about our role. I hesitate to say obligation or responsibility. I'm unsure about those concepts, but definitely about our role in academia to serve the community and make information accessible to the community, because and I think there's an increasingly there will be emphasis on this approach, because we are confronted with so much misinformation in this era of social information, where everyone's opinion counts. So the issue of accountability and is really important, and I think there we need to start thinking. It's partly what I'm also thinking about. How do we make sure for ourselves on a scientific level that what we say hold water, but also how do we convince our audiences that it's not a matter between opinions, but a matter between scientific information and ideologies, or simply opinions. That I think is a crucial issue in whatever field, you know, whether it's medicine or education or whatever field. So thanks for thinking about this topic.
Thanks. Yes. Yeah. Important. Mvuzo, would you like to comment?
Yes. I think because Marty now has, I think, emphasized the point. I really, I'm thinking about it. You know, from when Alex mentioned it. I find it very, very important to think about access. Well, thank you very much for that. It's really it's in my mind's eye now.
Yeah, there are a whole lot of important questions that, well, I mean, I've been scribbling away like mad in my book, but luckily we also have the recording, and I hope we'll be able to kind of get a transcript. Maybe the sound will be a bit better so that we can, you know, look at it again and think about these issues as we go along. Busisiwe, would you like to comment quickly before we move on to Alex?
Okay, thank you, Andre. Thank you, Mvuzo. This is a really interesting project indeed. And there's so much striking similarities, you know, in terms of what you're doing and what I'm doing. And I think I'm also very enthusiastic about the participatory action research approach that you seem to be looking into as well. And I think I'm also thrilled that the engagement is also aiming towards solving, you know, problems within communities. And it's not just engagement just for the sake of engagement, or engagement that is going to be one-sided in terms of just academic knowledge. I think one thing that I wanted to check was whether you were, I was just listening to the STEM project, and I was wondering how you would be able to measure the success of the project in terms of how impactful is it in terms of really having those learners improve their marks, you know? Have you built in any measures in terms of how you would be able to see that end product? Yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. Siwa. Thank you very much. And I'm also thrilled to have such a space and listen to those presentations, and you can see connections, especially when you can see connections between projects. So that's very exciting, and I guess it's a point for us to connect and maybe talk about things. So that would be nice as well. Thank you for your question. In terms of measuring the success of the project, a lot of the data that we'll be working with is taken from the reports and the write-ups that is offered by, that has been offered by the project. So I think they have been able to track some of their success stories. And there's so much information there in terms of even just the composition of the students from which schools, transport arrangements, catering arrangements, whatever the difficulties in terms of working with Sandral and the different service providers. So I think there are measurements there from project side. I don't think it's necessarily what our project is seeking to measure the success of the project. But I think more than anything, it's to write and help capture the importance of partnership, right? The community and industry working together to try and fill the gap, which is the production of science graduates, all right? And I think there's a lot of success in terms of students, high school students staying within the project, then a lot of them qualifying, their marks improving, then a lot of them qualifying for to study further. I think there's a lot of success captured within the data that the STEM project has provided to us, and then our role then would then to write up this angle of this, the importance of the partnership and the fact that different social groups can come together to solve a social problem.
Vuzo, thanks. Yes. So also fascinatingly interesting presentation, and thanks, Alex, for the you know, deeply philosophical questions. There's a whole lot there that would be very interesting to integrate into your writing. All these kind of philosophical questions about the nature of knowledge and you know, what exactly it is that we're doing, what change agents are doing, you know, whether they're accountable. All of these things are very interesting and very important aspects of engaged scholarship, I guess. So thanks very much for that. I think, again, with my sort of eye on time, let's move across to Alex and yeah, hear what you have to say, Alex.
Hey everyone, I've changed over to my phone now, so hopefully that means I'll get better signal and it's more consistent. Can you hear me okay there?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, so what I wrote about today is kind of like in some ways, what might form a case study of part of my broader research. So my research project is around climate justice. And it's looking, particularly in the South African context, how the minerals energy complex has made South Africa, you know, both one of the most unequal, but also one of the most exploitative and polluting countries in the world, right? And so how climate solutions really need to tackle that extractive economic structure if we're going to, you know, make meaningful progress to ensure justice as part of our climate action. And one of the sort of elements of looking into that is thinking about how sometimes the sort of decolonial justice arguments are misused by those that actually want to prop up those same extractive structures. And in particular, the piece that I wrote talks about Minister Mantashe and the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, how they often use like this narrative of decolonization and you know, fighting imperialism and in order to actually deepen the extractive structures that benefit, you know, neo-colonial entities like Shell and other multinational oil and gas corporations. So I've got this piece that I've written. It's a sort of an op-ed type piece, and actually, after I wrote it here, I should submit it to Mail and Guardian, so it'll be in the Mail and Guardian this weekend. If you want to have a read of it there, and then I'll try and fit it back into the research at some point. But basically, this relates around the fact that on the 30th of May, Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, Gwede Mantashe, is going to be back in the court. And he is going to be going up against local communities in the Eastern Cape who have been objecting to Shell doing seismic blasting for oil and gas along the Wild Coast, right? And in his sort of quest to promote this oil and gas, he has been claiming that this is the equivalent of the Eastern Cape second Nomkhawuse moment, right? And so kind of what I'm saying in this piece is that he's kind of right, but he misunderstands his role in the Nomkhawuse second moment. So just by way of context, Nomkhawuse was a Xhosa prophetess, right? And during the war with the British, she had a vision that her people should kill their cattle and destroy their crops, and that by doing so, their ancestors ensured that they won the war and prospered. Unfortunately, after killing hundreds of thousands of cattle, the result wasn't really prosperity, but rather a deep and devastating famine that really weakened the amaXhosa, right? And so Mantashe, in his retelling of this being the second Nomkhawuse moment, talks about how those who resist oil and gas are actually the ones asking us to kill our perennial cattle and crops. And what I'm trying to say in this piece is that actually it's Mantashe himself who's asking communities to sacrifice their lands and oceans to polluting oil and gas corporations under the false promise that they'll see prosperity as a result. And, you know, I then dedicate a bunch of the piece to talking about how, you know, these promises of oil and gas prosperity across the African continent have not quite played out as often promised. I talk a little bit about my family back in Mauritius, who just faced one of the biggest oil spills ever witnessed in the Indian Ocean, and how, you know, oil's legacy there hasn't really brought prosperity, but rather toxicity. Also talk about another place where Shell has promised prosperity, which is in the Niger Delta in Nigeria. And there, you know, despite, or maybe because of decades of Shell's oil and gas exploitation, it's an area of poverty, violence, inequality, lots of deadly toxic and polluted air, soil, and water. And similarly, our neighbor in Mozambique, there, you know, promises of oil and gas prosperity have proven to be quite farcical, So recent studies show that it has deepened poverty and inequality and not alleviated it, right? So I then go on to talk about how Mantasse's department is now going to speak to traditional leaders across the Eastern Cape, telling them on the benefits of oil and gas extraction. And I think this is an interesting element, because if we look to the role of traditional leaders under apartheid, they were often used to, push forward projects without proper community consultation. And if you look to a lot of the ANC's work right now, particularly with things like the Khoisan Traditional Leaders Bill, they're trying to deepen that, quite inequitable traditional leadership structure that often ignores community voices. And they seem to be using that now in their push to advance oil and gas projects in the Eastern Cape. And so I raise a bunch of questions about also how truthful the DMRE has been with traditional leaders, because one sort of example that comes out of their engagements with traditional leaders is that they told them, the Deputy Director General of the DMRE told them that oil and gas, the seismic surveys don't involve blasting, but that's the definition of what they are. It is blasting underwater to create sound waves across the oceans, which is why scientists have been warning against the impact, right? So it's not clear how truthful they've been in those engagements with traditional leaders. So in addition to using these traditional leader structures, which are in some ways relics of apartheid, Mantashe has also been taking this decolonial narrative and accusing those who resist shale oil and gas of enacting colonialism of a special kind. And there's all sorts of ironies and hypocrisies in that. One is the fact that who Mantashe is representing is Shell, which is Royal Dutch Shell is this very colonial institution, and it's still very much a neo-colonial structure that extracts profits and often leaves behind pretty devastating legacies. And then the second sort of hypocrisy is that a lot of the communities that are fighting against the shale extraction projects are doing so as part of a generations-long struggle to resist colonial extraction and violence. And so here, I kind of have the privilege of knowing one of the applicants, Sinigugu Zikulu, who's in the Shell case, who is part of Sustaining the Wild Coast, born and bred in Kolobeni. And I take one of the quotes from him, which says that what Mantashe does not understand is that what they stand for is the continuation of colonization, as what colonization stood for is how African resources are being extracted to benefit European superpowers. What they're doing now is absolutely nothing different. It is worse because we're allowing it to happen again and degrading the very basis of livelihoods for our people. And then I kind of end the piece by talking about, how according to the University of Fort Hare historian, Professor Jeff Perez, if you actually dig into the Nomqawuse cattle killing, it was apparently secretly engineered by the British, who influenced Nomqawuse as a way to weaken the then powerful Makossa, right? And it was part of a devious plan by Sir George Grey, who had devastated the Australian indigenous population and was brought to South Africa to do the same, right? So I kind of end the piece by saying how, in a seeming repeat of history, Mantashe is kind of selling a false prophecy of oil and gas prosperity, claiming that he's fighting against colonialism of a special kind. Meanwhile, he's actually working on behalf of neo-colonial forces like Shell. It's a company which the ANC has financial investments in through their investment arms like the Bato Trust. And so one other element of the Eastern Cape history that maybe Mantashe would do well to remember is how Nomqawuse's followers eventually turned against her for her false prophecies. So my hope is that we learn from history and Mantashe's followers cease to receive false prophecies and turn against them before, not after, we're forced to face the ravages of oil and gas extraction. So that was kind of the piece, and that kind of fits into, trying to debunk how decolonial narratives are often actually used to prop up similar sorts of extractive economies that are, colonial in their nature or neo-colonial, depending on how you define it. So that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. Wow. one wonders how one actually avoids feeling very, very depressed every day when when you are dealing with these issues. They seem incorrigible, but okay, that's just me. Let me not let me move on straight to Mvuzo, and maybe Mvuzo, you can comment on that, and then we'll open it up again.
Thanks, Andrea, and thank you, Alex, for the presentation. Really interesting work and ideas. What first grabbed me about this, is how Mantashe is just, in a sense, just gives you, like, just hands to you. It's ironic, but just the most vivid imagery. You know what I mean? Because he talks about this being a Nangawusa moment, and he just hands over to you the most perfect, like, conceptual lens to kind of understand, like, the government's relation to these corporations, because it's just it boggles the mind that he doesn't understand how, like how, the fact that he's on the wrong side of history about this, and he's on the wrong side of the concept, because and you did work in terms of drawing out how it's actually mining companies who after extracting as much as they can, leave communities devastated and possibly facing famine. And so that is in essence what Unongawuse did, promised victory and prosperity, but in actual fact, what resulted was great famine. And this is exactly what these corporations do, and this is what the promise of most times. That's what happens, And so it just really, I cannot understand how you thought this example was the right one to use. And so I found that interesting that he, it's such a nice idea that he hands over, like a researcher. It lends itself to research so perfectly, and he's completely on the wrong side of it. I think I've covered the second point that I had noted here. And I like the fact that you noted that if we don't transition to renewable energies, then even what happened with Unongawuse and the famine that resulted from her false prophecy, what's going to happen is going to be worse than that, So there's those grave implications that we need to think about. And then also, I think it seemed to me that, I don't know, Mantashe doesn't think, like, hard enough in terms of the ideas that he wants to use when communicating with people, because they seem a bit half-baked, because it's also unbelievable that he used colonialism of a special kind to describe what people objecting to the mining have to say, because as you described, the neocolonization is these companies going into African communities and extracting resources, especially primary resources to be used elsewhere to enrich these companies and various nations. So that too is interesting, how there's two big ideas here, and he's completely on the wrong side of that. And I think you go on draw the fact that there's a history in these communities of anti-colonial struggles, and he's completely disregarding that and just trying to use whatever sticks to twist logic and to completely misunderstand and misinterpret what is going on. So that I found also interesting, the fact that on a separate idea, it's also on the wrong side of that, and being very hypocritical. My last my last point is then on just a bit of a critique and points where I'd like clarity from you. I got the fact that you said it's not really a paper yet, a research article at this point. It's more for you publish it in the Maiden Guardian. But I think that was the gap that points to some of the gaps for me, because what I noticed was the fact that you did a good job in terms of growing the world one element of what your research is, or what your interest is, but there was not enough of a sense, especially for like a research seminar, enough of a sense of what the world two is. What is what's the theory that you are then working on, and what's the theory that explains the happenings here? What theory are you drawing from? And I think the reason I point this out is because that will give a sense of direction in terms of what the study is and what form it will take. So what form will your theoretical critique then take is a question that I put to you. And this has implications for other research components such as the methods and the research design. And also I had I had thought around what where the study fits in terms of I'm a fan of being mutable and going across areas and disciplines, but I just wanted to a sense of where your study fits in terms of, is it a study in history or politics, or is it based in like environmental science? And so as much as I commend for having a good lay of the land, I think and there's plenty of context, but I think just so there's plenty around in terms of context and the surrounds, but not enough in terms of like what in the theoretical basis and what you'll be using in terms of understanding or explaining the problem. Thank you. Those are my notes.
Great, thanks Mvuzo. Interesting questions. Alex, would you like to respond before we ask Marty and
Sounds good. My headphones just...
Hopefully you can hear me okay now. Okay, cool. So thanks, Mvuzo. That was really helpful engagements, and appreciate both the encouraging and the critical notes there. So I think on the question of like, is Mantashe just like clueless and handing these things over, these really nice metaphors without really thinking them through? It's funny, I'm reading a book at the moment on how propaganda works. And I think what Mantashe is doing is very purposeful. The idea is to play into the, the stereotype that environmentalists are whites and middle class. And so, whenever he talks about clean energy, he talks about its imperialism from the West. When he talks about those resisting, he talks about colonizers of a special kind. And I think he's invoking that propaganda tool of that stereotype to just keep reinforcing that all the time against those that oppose him, right? And so even though in some ways it seems like really like, this is just so false, and the communities who are fighting him are those communities in those areas. I think he knows that, but I think he's just very astute at using that repetition or that particular frame to dismiss the legitimacy of those that are fighting against him. And then to your critique on, where exactly does this sit and what is the research hypothesis? I think I do need to, I haven't technically started the postdoc yet, and so I haven't fully fleshed out what exactly the research thesis is. But I think, a big part of it, the question is around, how do we use these sort of decolonial narratives to help push for meaningful climate justice, and then how are they abused, is kind of what I was exploring in this piece. But I do need to get it a bit more refined and to get a better sense in my various different pieces that I'll be working on in the postdoc, what I'll be looking at. And I think I do have an issue that I tend to float across many departments, but technically my home base is philosophy. And so that's where, theories of justice and, questions around, what constitutes decolonization maybe will be at the core of some of the work. But, I think it's climate justice by its nature is incredibly interdisciplinary. So it does require us to look at history, at the science, at the politics, at the economics, and at questions of power relations and so on. So I find myself by necessity having to draw on all the different disciplines while still trying to keep a home base in philosophy. I think that often means that philosophers don't quite recognize me as a philosopher, and others don't quite know where I fit in. But thank you, it's really, really helpful, and maybe I can try and make it clearer as I develop it further.
Alex, you are truly a philosopher, because philosophy is everywhere and nowhere. So, okay, Marty, can we hear from you?
Yeah, Alex, thanks very much for explaining all of this to us. I think it's fascinating. I think what strikes me, and I mean, it's something that I also work with, is how people deliberately twist and turn a piece of information to serve their ideological purposes or their economic or their whatever purposes, but to serve, or their power positions or whatever. And I mean, highly intelligent people, most of us are very gullible in a way. Highly intelligent people, I often find very, very well-established professional people, and everybody else don't know how to ask critical questions. And I was wondering if before Mvuso asked you those questions now, I was wondering if you see it or think about how we can, if we can, what is necessary to help that society, the country society, the global society, to understand what kinds of questions one needs to ask when one is presented with something that needs discernment. Like the traditional leaders need to decide on whether that is an option for them or not. Because often when you are on the spot, you don't know what those critical questions are. And I know I'm going into the terrain of public scholarly work here that we discussed earlier. But is that something that we need to start thinking about? Because this issue of distorting facts is becoming more problematic. And by the way, I'm very keen to know what book you are reading about how propaganda works. I'd love to read it if you don't mind sharing that title. So just a comment. These are just thoughts that came up. That's all.
Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, thanks, Marty. I actually think you'll like that book. It's How Propaganda Works is literally the title, and it's by Jason Stanley, who is a Jewish author, and also talks a little bit in there about how Frank Lutz was involved in creating messages for the Israelis to help them deflect critical attention away from Palestinian oppression. So I think you'll appreciate that section that he writes in that book. So Jason Stanley, How Propaganda Works. And yeah, in terms of this question around, critical thinking, I think it is vitally important. And, so I did my PhD at the University of Washington there, and we had a philosophy for children intervention at schools, right? And it's a muscle, it's a mode of engagement that I think is vital to instill to create an active citizenry And maybe that's often why it's neglected by those in power, is that they don't want an active critical citizenry, because it does challenge those who use the likes of propaganda to maintain their power structures. So I would agree with you that we really need more critical interventions of that sort to help folks see through these propagandist type of demagoguery, essentially. And maybe that's part of what the role of engaged scholars can be, is to help cut through that, maybe in some of our more virtuous roles, is to help create an active citizenry and critical citizenry.
Thanks. Difficult task, and also potentially not only critical thinking, but complexity thinking. It's a little bit more than critical thinking, although it requires critical thinking. But this ability to negotiate a really complex world is something very difficult for all of us, but something very necessary. Busisiwe.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Alex. Very interesting presentation. And there's a lot of there are a lot of thoughts in my mind as I'm listening. And but I think to sum it all, I do gather that we'll always have conflicting views. And also I'm just intrigued by the propaganda book that you're talking about. And I'm asking myself, what is propaganda and to who is it? In terms of who is writing and who is receiving, will we always have one set of views as society, or will always have conflicting views? Are we able to bring conflicting views towards, to some synergy of some kind, or we can allow to differ, in the conflicting views that we have? It's just the thoughts that I'm having within me. Whether if I want to portray a certain point, will I be able to tolerate the other views and understand from their perspective what they are actually bringing to the solution? I think what I'm hearing here is that, of course, we have a problem in terms of the pollution in the country as well. And we also need urgent solutions in terms of renewable energy. And I think we need solutions, but to which extent will we be able to really come to some, to be able to come to those solutions without actually looking at the conflicting situations? It's just my thoughts, I'm just thinking aloud. I'm just thinking aloud.
Perfect, thanks, Alex.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. It's actually at the core of the book in a way. It's like, what counts as, propaganda that's, undermining the goals of like democratic engagement, where we can disagree in ways that are healthy, versus, speech that is, undermining that ability. And I think that's where it becomes a problem, is where you pretend, where you have speech that's supposedly about fulfilling a certain goal or value, but in actuality is being dishonest, partially telling the truth and actually undermining the goal that it claims to be, pushing forward. And so that's where I think Montashe is more of a, does what the author calls undermining demagoguery, and which is problematic and doesn't serve the goal of us coming to agreement on differences of opinion, and finding a shared path forward, but is instead meant to undermine your opponents and to delegitimize them, right? So I think that's where Montashe's type of speech is quite problematic. But I agree, there's all sorts of complexities around how we do this transition and where questions of justice come in, and there will be major disagreements that come along the way, and we need to navigate that in a way that respects each other, that also takes into account the deep inequalities and poverty and the histories of structural oppression, and works to transform those.
So, you know, if we're going to do that project, we can't have as the head of the most important ministry somebody who is, you know, spreading undermining propaganda like that. So yeah, lots of work ahead.
That's no maybe. That is actually an excellent phrase to kind of punctuate in a way our conversation and end it. Lots of work ahead for all of us. So I actually just want to thank all of you. It was a really interesting engagement. It's actually luckily for us, I suppose, that we were just the four of us, that we could actually then relax a bit about time and engage properly, because we have almost taken up all of our time anyway, and it was half of the people we were supposed to be. So maybe we need to rethink this kind of engagement as well. Perhaps 8 presentations or would have been far too much for our for us to get our teeth into some of these things. But I would very much like to continue this kind of engagement. I think it's very productive, very exciting, wonderful to actually kind of hear a little bit more detail about your projects and about how things are going. So yes, I would still, I would very much like to keep this kind of thing going. And I will send you the recording so that you can have a listen again if you want to some of the things. And please do establish those kinds of connections that we've been talking about. Share information. We're all on that WhatsApp group. We can use it as a kind of a mode of exchange. And if there are things, as I said, that you would like to do, projects that you would like to do that are more interactive, more engaged, or more kind of engaged, let me know. Let's see if we can make something happen. I'll send you the link to our tributaries project. That was a kind of a mixed bag project, which could be repeated. I'm open for something like that. I'm looking particularly at Alex. But I mean, I know you have lots to do, but that was a particularly interesting way of mixing academic activity with engagement activity, and actually, a very different way of knowledge production through pilgrimages and, gathering together. And it was really anyway, I won't say more about that. So yes, I just want to say thank you all for participating in this, and that horrible moment of actually sort of, saying goodbye. But it's not a long kind of, it's not a, how can we say it? It's not a goodbye forever. It's just like a temporary cheers, and we'll pick up again. We'll see you all soon, hopefully. And do keep in contact. Yes. That's it. Hey, I mean, would anyone like to kind of comment or just, oh goodness, sorry. Apologies. Don't know how to get, okay, it's gone. Okay, so maybe just a brief word from everybody, and then we'll say goodbye. Okay, Alex, let's start with you, since you're there.
Thanks, everyone. I really appreciated this. It was really nice to learn about everybody's work and to see where folks are, engaging. And I think it's going to be an exciting journey together, and I look forward to seeing how everybody's work develops till the next time we meet. So thanks, and appreciate the really helpful feedback too.
Thanks. Yeah, it was lovely to have you here. Marty?
Yeah, I echo what Alex said, and just to say thank you for creating this platform. It's very inspiring to hear what others do, and it's encouraging, and it helps one to focus in a short period of time. I'm actually working on something else, on finishing my book, and I had to stop that to focus on this, and I'm very pleased that I did, because now it gives one more time to think about what you want to do, and it's great to get input from other people. Actually focuses one's own efforts, and the discussion is very enriching. I want to thank everyone your input. I enjoyed it, and thank you, Andrea, for organizing this.
Oh, no, you're welcome. Thank you all for being here. Busisiwe?
Thank you very much, Andrea. I'll seem to be repeating what they are saying, but this was it was really a very fruitful interaction, and in the true sense of engagement. And it was very important to learn from what others are doing and to also get feedback in terms of what one is doing. So thank you very much for this platform, and I wish everyone a great journey in their endeavors, in their projects. And it is wonderful to know that we are a team and will continue, working with each other along the way. All the best, everyone.
Thanks, Mrs. And lovely to see your face.
Thank you.
So it's also very nice to kind of see people's faces and voices and have a more extended kind of engagement. I'm really hoping that we will do some of this in person. Also, that has another dynamic to it, which is also very exciting. Vuzo.
Thank you, Andrea. No, the in-person was very good. Like having seen when I was in PE last week, a couple of people myself, so that's I encourage more in-person engagements if possible.
Yes.
But no, thanks for this, and it was good to hear from everyone. Really interesting work, and thanks for the inputs, and suggestions and questions. So there's a lot to think about, and I look forward to the next engagement. So much.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yes, I mean, the next engagement hopefully will, have a whole, another 4 additional voices. So it will be, even bigger. It's a bigger team than our 4, but I'm very glad that we managed to kind of have a longer time to kind of get a bit, I should actually just show you, I mean, I've got, pages and pages of notes just from this engagement. So thank you all, and see you soon, and good luck with all the 4 papers I'm seeing coming out of this, the 4 articles that will be submitted and ready by the end of the year. Just saying, no pressure. All right, cheers. Bye.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.
Hi, everyone.